It is no secret that men will go a great length to have sex with a woman they find attractive. However, the case of Baltasar is extreme. His actions were not only wicked but also involved betrayal and a deliberate attempt to frustrate his victims, to the point of despair, as people continue to wonder why he treated these women with such heartlessness. Another woman has come forward to share her regretful encounter with Baltasar. Atembelesi TV has the details.
As a woman working as a driver in the National Financial Investigation Agency, I was initially dedicated to my job, ensuring the smooth operations of the high-profile investigations we managed. Baltasar Ngonga, the head of our team, was a charismatic and driven leader, someone I admired for his intelligence and ability to navigate the complexities of our work. He was respected within the agency, and I often found myself in situations where we had to work closely together, spending long hours in tense, high-pressure environments. In the beginning, it was nothing more than a professional relationship. I was married at the time, trying to balance my career with my home life. But Baltasar's attention to me slowly shifted from professional to personal. He would compliment me on my work, ask about my day, and over time, the small conversations became more intimate. His confidence and the way he made me feel important were intoxicating, especially when I was feeling undervalued in my own personal life. My marriage was struggling, and I began to find solace in Baltasar's words and actions. One day, during a particularly challenging assignment, he confided in me about the pressures he was under and how he understood the burdens I was carrying. We started spending more time together outside of work, talking late into the night about everything from our careers to our personal lives. He made me feel special in ways that my husband hadn't in years. It was this emotional connection that, at the time, felt genuine and deep. Baltasar promised me that he understood me in a way no one else did, and he spoke of a future where we could be together away from the complications of our work and personal lives. The promises he made, though, were never fully clear. He would tell me how much he cared for me, but there was always an excuse or a delay when it came to making real commitments. Despite the doubts that lingered in my mind, I was consumed by the idea of a new beginning with him. My marriage had already been rocky, and the emotional connection I had with Baltasar gave me the strength to make a decision that would change everything. I divorced my husband, believing that leaving him behind was the right step toward a new chapter in my life, one where I could pursue love and fulfillment with someone who truly understood me. I walked away from everything I knew, hoping that Baltasar's promises were not just words, but a genuine desire for a life together. But as time passed, I began to realize that Baltasar's promises were empty. He was never as committed as he had led me to believe. There were always excuses, always reasons why we couldn't take the next step. Our relationship, once full of potential, began to feel more like a game to him, a way for him to manipulate me into focusing on him rather than the reality of my own life. It was a painful awakening. The more I tried to cling to the hope of a future with Baltasar, the more I saw that I had been chasing a lie. He had used my vulnerability and emotions to lead me into a situation where I had left behind my past for something that was never real. The love he had promised was nothing more than manipulation, and I was left with the consequences of my decisions, alienated from my past, disconnected from my former self. Eventually, I had to accept that I had been deceived. The truth was clear: I had sacrificed too much for a man who never intended to fulfill the promises he had made. It took time to rebuild my life, but I learned a hard lesson about trust, self-worth, and the importance of maintaining personal integrity, even in the face of seemingly genuine affection. The affair with Baltasar was a chapter one wished I could erase, but it was a painful, necessary lesson in understanding the difference between real love and false promises. At the time, I didn't fully understand the depth of what I was getting into. Baltasar's charm and attention created an emotional void I hadn't realized existed in my own life. My marriage had become stagnant, and I was feeling disconnected, overlooked, and unimportant. Baltasar made me feel seen and appreciated in ways that were incredibly powerful in that moment. His charisma, confidence, and the emotional bond we seemed to share clouded my judgment, and I didn't see the whole picture clearly. I was aware that Baltasar was already married to Maria and had children. I knew this, but I told myself that the situation didn't matter. I rationalized it by thinking that he was unhappy in his marriage. He often spoke of the pressures and difficulties of balancing work and family, and how he longed for a more fulfilling personal life. At the time, I believed that what he was offering me was real, and that if we had a future together, it would be different. I didn't want to be the other woman, but my emotions clouded my perception of the situation. I guess I was looking for something that felt genuine and real. Baltasar had a way of making me believe that what we had was special, unique. He promised me a future that would be different, a life that would give me the love and fulfillment I had been missing. At the time, I convinced myself that if he really loved me, we could figure out a way to make it work, even if that meant becoming his second wife or navigating the complexities of a relationship with someone already committed to another. Looking back, I can see that it was a deeply flawed mindset. I wasn't seeing the full truth. I was blinded by my own desires for validation and a sense of purpose, something I felt I was missing. The reality was that I was allowing myself to be manipulated by his promises and the emotional rollercoaster he created. I wasn't thinking clearly or logically. All I could see was the idea of a future with someone who seemed to offer me the kind of love I had been craving, even if it meant compromising my values and disregarding the fact that he was already committed to someone else. The truth is, I was vulnerable and emotionally vulnerable, and Baltasar took advantage of that. It's a painful realization, but it taught me the importance of self-respect and not letting anyone manipulate your emotions or sense of worth, no matter how convincing they may be. The day I slept with Baltasar for the first time was one of those moments in which my judgment was clouded by intense emotions and confusion. By that point in our relationship, the lines between professional and personal had become increasingly blurred. The intensity of our work, combined with the emotional connection I thought we shared, made me feel like I could trust him, despite knowing the reality of his marriage and family. That particular day, we had just wrapped up a particularly stressful investigation. Tension was high, and the pressure from our work was weighing heavily on both of us. Baltasar seemed to understand my struggles and, as usual, offered me comfort and reassurance. He told me I was valuable, that I mattered, and that he could offer me something more, something I needed. At that moment, I was emotionally vulnerable and didn't have the clarity to see things as they truly were. We were in the parking garage, and the atmosphere was heavy. The workday had ended, but the emotional weight from the cases we were dealing with lingered. Baltasar, sensing my vulnerability, pulled me aside. He spoke softly, his words sweet and promising, making me feel like I was the most important person in his world, despite the fact that he had a wife and children. What happened next was a blur, a moment of weakness and misjudgment. I was seeking validation and emotional connection, and I let myself be swept up in the moment. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't something I thought through. It was a mistake, one that I would later regret deeply. It was a moment of emotional desperation, not only for him but for me as well. In hindsight, I recognize that I allowed myself to be manipulated. The promises he made, the false assurances, all contributed to me believing in a reality that wasn't there. That night in the parking lot marked a turning point where I crossed a line I never should have crossed, and I realized far too late that the love I thought I had with Baltasar was never real. The affair continued, but that moment, in particular, stood out as a symbol of how I had allowed myself to lose my sense of self and judgment in the name of seeking love and attention. It's a painful memory, one I wish I could erase, but it's also part of a learning process that ultimately led me to understand my own worth and the importance of self-respect. After the incident in the parking garage, things between Baltasar and I became even more entangled. He had a way of making me believe that what we shared was real, and his manipulation continued in subtle ways. He knew how to speak to my insecurities, and his words, though often empty, were convincing. He painted a picture of a life we could have together, but I was too emotionally involved to see the truth. There was one night in particular when we found ourselves alone in his office after a late-night meeting. The work never really stopped, and the pressure from the cases we were handling was relentless. The office was quiet, with only the low hum of the fluorescent lights breaking the silence. We had been talking for hours about the case, about our lives, then slowly the conversation turned more personal again. He spoke to me with such intensity, telling me that he cared about me in ways that seemed to contradict his marriage and family life. In that moment, I allowed myself to be consumed by the emotions he stirred within me. We had crossed a boundary already, and there was no turning back. The connection, at least in my mind, felt undeniable. The physical act that followed in his office was another misguided attempt at finding the emotional connection I so desperately craved. I regret that moment deeply, as it was a poor decision on so many levels. What's even harder to come to terms with is that Baltasar, in his leadership role, knew how to manipulate the situation further. He recorded a video of that night. At the time, I didn't question it. I was overwhelmed by my emotions and, in that moment, trusted him. But looking back, I now see that it was a way for him to assert control over me, a means of further binding me to him, even though he never truly cared for me. That video wasn't something I ever wanted. It wasn't something I asked for. But in that moment, I was too caught up in the confusion of my feelings and the situation to understand the depth of manipulation I was under. I only realized how damaging it was after everything unraveled, after I understood the degree to which I had been deceived. What I've learned, and what I wish I had known then, is that true love and respect don't come from manipulation, false promises, or exploiting someone's vulnerabilities. The video, the affair, the lies, they were all part of a pattern that kept me trapped in a situation I should have walked away from long before it got to that point. The pain of those decisions still haunts me. But they were a turning point. They were a reminder that seeking validation and emotional connection in the wrong places can have profound consequences. It took a long time to rebuild my life and my sense of self-worth after that, but the experience ultimately taught me the importance of trust, boundaries, and the need to protect myself from people who seek to manipulate and control. There was also a sense of shame and fear that came with the situation. Once things had gone this far, I felt trapped. I didn't want to admit to myself or anyone else that I had made a mistake, that I had allowed myself to fall into a situation I wasn't proud of. I kept thinking that if I just waited, if I just held on, things would change. The shame of what I was doing made it harder to leave the situation or to see it for what it truly was. It was a combination of emotional desperation, manipulation, and a profound sense of being lost. The belief that there was a chance for something real with Baltasar kept me in that cycle. But as time went on, and the lies and manipulations became more evident, I realized the painful truth: I had been chasing a mirage. The love he promised wasn't real, and I was allowing myself to be controlled and deceived by someone who never had my best interests at heart. Ultimately, it was a lesson in self-worth. I had to learn to stop seeking validation from others, especially from someone who didn't value me. It took a lot of time to rebuild my self-esteem and to understand that I deserved better than what I had settled for. The regret I feel now serves as a reminder that I should have listened to my instincts earlier, and that real love is based on mutual respect, honesty, and trust, things I never had with Baltasar. I first began to realize that Baltasar's love was fake when the emotional promises he had made to me started to unravel. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, painful realization that came over time, particularly as the relationship grew more one-sided and I began to notice the inconsistencies in his words and actions. At first, I convinced myself that his reluctance to take our relationship to the next level, whether in terms of commitment or planning a future together, was just due to his complicated life with Maria and their children. I understood that he had responsibilities, and I thought, once everything settles down, we can be together. But as time went on, it became clear that things were never going to settle down. The reassurances he gave me about a future never materialized into anything concrete. His actions didn't match his promises. One pivotal moment came when I realized that he never made any real effort to make our relationship public. Despite how much he told me he cared for me and how he would speak of our future, he always found excuses to keep me in the shadows. I started to feel like I was a secret, an afterthought rather than a priority. The real turning point came when, during one of our rare moments of confrontation, he admitted that he couldn't leave his family. It was a gut-wrenching conversation, one I had avoided for a long time, but I finally pushed him to be honest with me. In that moment, he told me that while he cared for me, he couldn't break up his family for the sake of a relationship with me. It was crushing to hear, and though he tried to soften the blow by saying he didn't want to hurt me, the truth was clear. I had been a source of comfort for him, not a partner in the way I had hoped. From then on, it became harder to ignore the reality that I had been chasing a version of love that wasn't based on honesty or mutual respect. I was being used emotionally, made to feel like I was special and loved when, in fact, I was just an escape for him from the pressures of his life. This truth, painful as it was, started to sink in when I realized that Baltasar was never going to be the man he had promised to be for me. After the incident, I felt conflicted and uneasy about the situation, but the full weight of what had happened didn't hit me until later. Baltasar assured me that it was just a private moment, something that was between the two of us. But even then, I had an underlying feeling of discomfort that I didn't know how to articulate. When I began to see the reality of our relationship, the video became a symbol of how deeply I had been manipulated. I don't know if he deleted it or if it was kept hidden, but I eventually realized that the video was not just a personal memento, it was something that could be used to control me, to keep me tied to him through guilt, fear, or shame. It wasn't until after our relationship began to unravel that I felt the full emotional impact of that moment. I never saw the video myself after that night, but the power it held over me wasn't in the footage itself. It was in the emotional hold Baltasar had on me, making me feel trapped in a situation I should have walked away from much earlier. Today, my biggest regret is allowing myself to be manipulated by someone I thought I could trust. I regret not listening to my instincts and staying true to my values, particularly when it came to my own self-respect. I allowed emotional vulnerability and a desire for validation to cloud my judgment, which led me into a situation that caused me a great deal of pain and loss. I regret believing Baltasar's promises when I should have seen the warning signs. I convinced myself that his attention and the emotional connection he seemed to offer were enough, but in reality, I was being used. I didn't protect myself in the way I should have, and it took a lot of heartache and self-reflection to understand how deeply I had been misled. Another regret is that I allowed the situation to affect my sense of worth for so long. I let myself be defined by someone else's actions and words rather than relying on my own strength and independence. I stayed in a cycle of false hope and emotional dependence, thinking things would change when, in fact, they never would. Finally, I regret the impact this situation had on my personal life, on my marriage, my sense of self, and my ability to trust others. The choices I made affected more than just me, and I wish I had been stronger, more self-aware, and better at setting boundaries to protect myself from emotional manipulation. I never thought it would happen to me, but here I am, grappling with the painful truth. When I first met Baltasar in Gonga, I was swept up in the excitement of something new. He was charming, attentive, and made me feel like I was the only one who mattered. But as time passed, the cracks began to show. I started noticing the inconsistencies in his words, the little lies that seemed harmless at first but now feel like betrayals. Now, I regret not seeing the red flags sooner. I let myself get too close, allowed myself to believe in his stories, and even let him into my life in ways I'm now ashamed of. The worst part is, I regret sleeping with him. I trusted him, gave him something I can never get back, only to discover that all of it was a lie. The pain I feel now is more than just disappointment, it's a deep sense of self-betrayal. I wish I had listened to my gut, seen through his facade before it was too late. But now, all I can do is regret the choices I made and learn from this mistake. The regret keeps eating away at me, and it's hard to escape it. It's not just about the physical part, it's about everything that came with it, the emotional investment, the trust one gave, the hope I had for something real. I thought maybe he was just a little damaged, that he needed time to open up, but now I see that I was just another conquest, another person to feed his ego. I wanted so badly to believe in him, to believe in us, that I ignored the signs of dishonesty and manipulation. Looking back, there were moments when my instincts told me something wasn't right. The way he'd conveniently leave out important details, or how his stories never quite added up. But I brushed it off, told myself I was overthinking things, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. Now I realize that trusting him was the biggest mistake I could have made. I gave him more than I should have, let myself get tangled in something that was never genuine. I let him see the vulnerable parts of me, the parts one should have protected, and for what? To feel deceived, used, and discarded. I can't help but wonder how many others he's done this to, how many times he's told the same lies to get what he wants. I wish I could go back and make different choices, protect myself better, listen to the warnings, or even just walk away before it got this far. But the truth is, what's done is done, and now I have to live with it. The hardest part is knowing I allowed it to happen, that I didn't see the truth until it was too late. I can only hope that I learn from this and never let anyone take advantage of me like that again.
That's a story I believe all married women should learn from. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.